Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Uh, where's everybody? I don't see even a count of zero on the number of people watching. Anyway, so tonight I wanted to talk about um, a few things as just sticking with our general theme of talking about the Israeli attack on Gaza and the horrific toll that it's taking. And also wanted to, or I want to look at what a couple of politicians have had to say about that. Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders, who, as you know, were candidates for the uh, presidential nomination in 2000. And, a lot of people, of course, supported Bernie Sanders, probably the most popular candidate. And Tulsi Gabbard was popular among a certain segment of the population who were very concerned about foreign policy. And, well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about Gabbard. Back in that period when she was still in Congress and she was running for president, she had a fairly progressive uh, record overall. Considering that we're talking about Congress here, so basically, hardly anybody's politics are good. But she had a very good record on environmental issues. She was the first person to introduce a climate change bill into Congress. She had pretty liberal domestic policies. She supported a variant on universal health care similar to Australia's universal health care program. But she was most noted for her stances on foreign policy, where she um, basically was the only person, certainly running for president, who took a contrary position on almost every foreign policy issue that her party had a position on. And so she was about the only person in Congress who opposed the various forms of U.S. intervention in Syria and called out the false flag um, allegations that Syria's government had used chemical weapons. She opposed coups or coup attempts in Bolivia and Venezuela. She blasted Donald Trump for assassinating a leading Iranian general and political figure. And basically, for the most part, opposed U.S. Military interventions. One issue where she wasn't all that great at the time was Israel, but even there it was kind of a mixed bag. So, for example, unfortunately, she opposed BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the movement of the Palestinian diaspora and Palestinian supporters worldwide to follow in the footsteps of the movement against South African apartheid and bring political pressure to bear on Israel through boycotts and divestment and so forth. And Tulsi Gabbard opposed that. She often voted to support military aid to Israel. However, at the same time, she quite frequently condemned the Israeli government. Let's see if I have an example here. No, I don't have it up and I don't feel like looking for it. But she condemned Israel for its attacks on peaceful protests in the Great March of Return in 2018, and basically said, look, they're shooting unarmed civilians in cold blood. That's totally not okay. They need to stop. But fast forward to 2023, when on October 7th, Hamas and I guess it's the Al-Qassam Brigade is their armed wing, and other armed militants from Gaza launched an attack on Israeli military outposts and settlements surrounding Gaza. And as I assume you know, Gaza has been under a blockade for, let's see, what is it, 17 years, where only very limited supplies of food and water and electricity and fuel and medicine and so forth were allowed in. Gazans were not allowed to leave Gaza without special permission. They even had warships off the coasts and wouldn't even let Palestinian fishermen go out and fish, let alone anybody enter or leave Gaza by sea. And so what happened on October 7th was that the Palestinian armed resistance breached the fence between Gaza and Israel in several different places and attacked and took over a military base and various military checkpoints and settlements. And in the process, a lot of people, both military and civilians, were killed. And the allegations were overwhelmingly in the Western media and on the part of the Israelis that all the civilian deaths were caused by Hamas, deliberately killing civilians or something. And now we have, and there were other allegations like supposedly 40 babies had been beheaded and there were mass rapes of women and this or that atrocity was alleged against Hamas. Most or all of these atrocities turn out not to have any evidence to back them, as I've discussed on the show before. But finally somebody showed up. Hopefully there's more than one person watching. But anyway, so in the weeks following that initial spate of publicity about the events of October 7th, it came out that Israel had, in fact, the IDF had fired on kibbutzes and on people fleeing from the vicinity of the music festival, where a lot of people were killed with helicopter gunships and tank shells and missiles and bombs from aircraft and so forth. So, and there were a lot of Israeli eyewitnesses who said, "Yeah, look, we were being held captive, or we're in the same house with Hamas or other fighters from Gaza, and Israel just fired tank shells at our house and destroyed it and killed almost everybody, including both Hamas fighters and Israeli civilians." There was a video released recently of a helicopter gunship attack on people fleeing from the Reim music festival. Not distinguishing whether they were Hamas or other Palestinian soldiers or civilians. And so that, in all likelihood, is how a lot of the civilians killed at the music festival were killed, was through friendly fire. So we still don't know a lot about who killed who, but we do have pretty good evidence that it wasn't just like this. These horrible butchers from Gaza, committed these terrorist attacks, and that's how 1,200 people or whatever the figure is died. But if you look at the reactions of Western politicians, their rhetoric hasn't changed, and right from the beginning, um, there was condemnation of Hamas, but not of Israel or of the IDF. So let's have a look at what Tulsi Gabbard, who's well known for supposedly um, being a proponent of the Hawaiian philosophy of aloha, where um, you treat people with respect, even if they're complete strangers. So I titled this "No Aloha for Palestinians," and it indeed seems to be true that there's very little on her part for Palestinians. Um, so let's have a look here at what she had to say. Let's try this one. Yeah, be nice if it would just come on up. Okay. So Tulsi says on October 9th, a couple of days after Hamas et al. Launched their attack, the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by the Islamist terrorist group Hamas. This is just the latest example of the greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shia Islamic jihadists throughout the world. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamic jihadists are the greatest short and long-term threat to the safety, security, and freedom of the American people and people throughout the world. So what Americans or other people throughout the world, other than Israeli soldiers and civilians living illegally in the vicinity of Gaza, has Hamas ever been a threat to? Or Islamic jihadists, at least in recent years, and why is Hamas simply a terrorist group as opposed to a group that's trying to liberate Gaza from basically being an open air prison or concentration camp, whatever you want to call it, where some of the fighters, yes, have indeed committed crimes against civilians. There's pretty good reason to think that that did happen based on the evidence that we have. But on the other hand, there, as I mentioned, there's all this evidence that many civilians, as well as soldiers, because Israel also bombed their own military base in an effort to liberate it from Hamas, from Al-Qassam, whatever you want to call them, killing many soldiers, in the process, and the shelling and so forth of the kibbutzes resulted in not just deaths of Palestinian soldiers, but also deaths of civilians. We don't know who killed how many, but it certainly wasn't just Hamas. But anyway, by this time, October 9th, Israel is already engaged in a massive bombing campaign, almost exclusively directed against civilians because, of course, Palestinian soldiers are well protected in underground tunnels that exist throughout Gaza for the most part. So, overwhelmingly civilians that are being killed. And, you can see that when you look at the figures on deaths. So over 11,000 people in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, have been killed, and well over 4,000, perhaps it's up to 5,000 now, have been children. How many child soldiers do you know of? Contrast that with the figures that you'll find in Haaretz, basically Israeli equivalent of the New York Times, where out of roughly 1,200 people killed, almost all of them are in the age group of from about 18 to 30. Very few children, no children under 4. So the beheaded or burned babies or whatever story is complete bullshit. And I think something like 500 of those killed were in the military or security forces. Hardly any in Gaza that have been killed have been. They don't keep exact track, but we can safely infer, given the age distribution of the casualties and the fact that Hamas is able to stay underground, protected from Israeli bombs, that the overwhelming majority of the casualties are civilians. But anyway, let's see what else Tulsi had to say. On November 1st, on Fox News, she had this to say.
At things like what Representative Cori Bush is saying, what the squad is saying, what so many of these other people are saying who are accusing Israel of committing a genocide. It is the height of hypocrisy, because they're apologists and supporters of these Islamist Hamas terrorists who are calling for a genocide, the extermination of all Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And we're seeing this being carried out by these.
Okay, so, all right, I'm going to stop it here and respond. Well, let's break this down. She's saying that Kamala Harris and the squad are supposedly supporting Hamas, and
the squad is saying what so many of these other people are saying who are accusing Israel of committing a genocide.
Okay, so people are accusing Israel of committing a genocide. She can't even condemn Israel's carpet bombing of Gaza, or their cutoff of food and water and every other basic necessity of life almost completely from Gaza. So they're starving people out and depriving them of water, and hospitals. There was a story this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, of 39, so approximately 40 babies in a Gaza hospital who died because the electricity of the hospital was cut off, and the incubators therefore couldn't run that they were in. So as opposed to the 40 beheaded babies story that Israeli propaganda has concocted being false, the reality that we can see on video is just at that one hospital, 40 babies approximately in Gaza were killed by Israel, and certainly a lot more than that overall, and thousands of children.
It is the height of hypocrisy, because they're apologists and supporters of these Islamist Hamas terrorists who are calling for a genocide, the extermination of all Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And we're seeing
this being carried out. Okay, well, even if you go all the way back to 1988, which is well before the vast majority of soldiers in Al-Qassam or other armed groups were born, you don't find Hamas calling for killing all Jews worldwide, or even in Israel. And more recently, they make a clear distinction in their 2017 charter between Jews and Zionists. And they don't even say kill all Zionists. They just say Zionism needs to be ended, and we have every right to engage in armed resistance to end Israeli apartheid, end the Zionist state that's dominating us, and that we don't have any quarrel with Jews per se. They've said that, and look, Tulsi, who is actually committing the genocide here? It's not Hamas. it is Israel. Ross Siegel, who is a professor who's an expert on genocide, professor of genocide and Holocaust studies, calls this a textbook case of genocide. And how is it not? I mean, just indiscriminate bombing of hospitals and schools and ambulances and neighborhoods and apartment buildings and on and on and on. Plus, just a complete state of siege where all basic necessities of life, which because of how Israel has wrecked their economy over the years, Gaza can't provide for itself for the most part. Cutting off all basic necessities of life. What little capacity to generate electricity or purify water or what have you, Israel has made sure to bomb that. So one hospital was being supplied with electricity by solar arrays in the neighborhood. Israel took out all of those. So anyway, I talked about this last week, I believe. There's absolutely no doubt that this is a genocide. 11,000 people plus killed in only a month. That's just like several hundred people a day being killed. And we think back in history to a lot of horrible things that have happened in the last few decades. Even say the Iraq War wasn't on a day-by-day basis as deadly as the attacks currently being carried out by Israel against Gaza. And of course, as I've mentioned before, they're also attacking the West Bank, where Hamas doesn't even exist. So you can't blame that on Hamas, certainly. So anyway, let's let her continue here.
Seeing this being carried out by these violent mobs and threats and other things that are happening against Jewish people literally around the world. And the worst part is they're doing this under the guise of, well, we care about innocent people and we don't want people to get hurt, when in fact they are in essence supporting and apologizing for the barbaric actions of Hamas against innocent women, children, and civilians.
Okay, so not one word about the violence of the IDF and Israeli settlers against innocent women, children, and I guess she meant men, because that's the only category of civilians left. Thousands and thousands, Tulsi, and she's carrying on about supposed violent attacks being carried out against Jews around the world. Where? I mean, yeah, there have been a couple of assaults, but a Palestinian American boy was killed, stabbed to death in Chicago. Not a fucking word about that. This is just. I mean, in the past, a few years ago, she was careful to draw distinctions between, say, civilians in Syria who she displayed empathy for. They're suffering under the attacks of Al Qaeda and ISIS affiliated groups in Syria. But distinguish between them and the actual terrorists like Al-Nusra and so forth. And now that that distinction's just gone out the window, and the only people in this conflict she seems to care about are Israelis. Any sympathy for Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims, which of course, as many Palestinians and people elsewhere in the region are Christian. They're not just Muslims. But anyway, just no consideration for them whatsoever. It's disgusting. And I'm glad she's against the war in Ukraine, but it certainly doesn't make up for this.